Thank you, Allison. I actually don't have slides. I have props. I'm going to put them up here. I think there is no such thing as alternative medicine. If an alternative medicine works, then it's medicine. If an alternative medicine doesn't work, then it's not an alternative. The question is testing it. There are probably 54,000 dietary supplements on the market. I would say fewer than 50 have any real safety and efficacy profile. But despite that, for disorders especially like autism, there's a tremendous pull to use an alternative medicines. There are at least 5 books out there on how to heal autism or how to prevent autism. And so it's easy to see where that comes from. And when there are disorders for which there isn't a clear cause or causes and there's not a clear cure, that's where alternative medicine often steps in. So what I thought I would do, I wasn't going to talk specifically about autism treatments because the data are essentially not there, but I just want to sort of go through, I guess, a trip that, I'll start anyway, with a trip that my wife and I took to Cape May, New Jersey about a year ago and walked into a GNC center. So we walked into the center and we asked the 25-year-old man working behind the counter what he would recommend for people who were interested in having better heart health, better cardiovascular health. And he sort of immediately pointed us to this thing that says, for those of you who can't see in the back, it says Natural E 1000. Now, if you look on the back of this, it says that it's 3,333% of the recommended daily allowance. That's 33 times the recommended daily allowance. If you open up the bottle and take out what's inside, what you find is it's a sort of brown gel cap that's about half the size of an almond. Now, almonds are actually an excellent source of vitamin E. You would have to eat 1,650 almonds to get what's in that one gel cap. Begging the question, why is the word natural on the front of this bottle? That's not a natural thing to do. And now there are many studies, at least 20 studies actually, that have shown that if you take these quantities of vitamin E or vitamin A or beta-carotene, which is a vitamin A precursor, or selenium, which is a mineral, all of which have to some extent antioxidant activity, that you actually increase your risk of heart disease and increase your risk of cancer. The reason being that it's possible to get too much of a good thing. Although antioxidant always sounds like a good word, you can actually shift the balance of oxidation and antioxidation in your body so much so that you have too much antioxidant activity. You need oxidation to do things like kill new cancer cells, which probably are generated in your body far more frequently than you'd like to believe. You need oxidation to do things like kill invading microbes. I mean, I'm in the world of infectious diseases. Oxidation is a good thing. Children that don't have an oxidative burst are actually at risk of having bacterial infection. So, in fact, his recommendation in many ways shows where I think there are times when alternative medicine crosses the line into quackery. If you ask that 25-year-old guy behind the counter, what would you recommend for somebody who has high levels of bad cholesterol, so-called LDL or low-density lipoprotein cholesterol, he will direct you to garlic, concentrated garlic. And he did that. By the way, this all wasn't cheap, by the way, to buy all this stuff. But, and so this actually is an area, again, where there is actually a fair amount of data. It's not hard to do the kinds of studies when the readout is a number. And if you look at people who have high levels of LDL cholesterol and you give them concentrated garlic as compared to placebo, there's absolutely no difference. So concentrated garlic doesn't lower LDL cholesterol. And if you have, certainly if you have a history of cardiovascular disease or you've ever had a cardiovascular event, it is absolutely clear that you benefit from a statin. So if you choose to take this concentrated garlic instead, you're making a bad choice that could potentially limit your life. Now there are times, I think, where there is some value in alternative medicine. Actually, I wrote a book about this. It was called Do You Believe in Magic? The Sense and Nonsense of Alternative Medicine. When I first wrote the book, the title of the book was Quacks, How They Hurt Us and Why We Let Them. That was the title. But I think there actually is some value in this, and I'll tell you where. So a number of years ago, I had surgery on my left knee. It was microfracture surgery. I don't know if you know about the surgery, but it's tough surgery, and it takes really about a year to recover from that surgery. So my University of Pennsylvania trained orthopedist, sports medicine orthopedist, recommended that during my acute recovery period that I take chondroitin sulfate and glucosamine. Now, this also has been studied, and it's clear that chondroitin sulfate and glucosamine does nothing to relieve the pain of osteoarthritis, nor would you imagine it it would. I mean, collagen is what I need to start depositing in my knee as I recover from microfracture surgery. Collagen is an abundantly made substance. You make it all the time. Assuming you're relatively well nourished, which I am, it's not a problem. And why would one ever imagine that if you eat chondroitin, sulfate, and glucosamine, which are constituents of collagen, that it would first get through the acid and proteases of your stomach, magically reassemble into collagen, and deposit itself in my left knee? So, but that said, if I hadn't, been stupid enough to actually look up the articles to see that, in fact, this was no better than placebo, that didn't mean that this couldn't work as a placebo. And if I took it with his assurance that this was going to work, which is what he did, thinking that it was going to work may have been enough to do things like cause me to release my own endorphins, which are chemicals made by the pituitary and hypothalamus that actually are pain-relieving medicines. And it may have made it such that I didn't have to take NSAIDs or COX-2 inhibitors like Celebrex, which do have side effects. This is, although expensive, by the way, is, certainly causes no side effects. So you can argue there is something to be said for the placebo response. Just because something isn't better than placebo doesn't mean that it can't act as a placebo, and that's sort of where I kind of softened my tone in this book. There's another example, and I'll do this. This is my mother is actually sitting right here. She's going to love this example because it's about my daughter, her granddaughter. Our daughter last year was part of when she was in her senior year at high school, was part of a crew team that did fairly well. I mean, they went to the nationals, and so it was a competitive boat. But sometimes what would happen to her is before the race, she would get tinglings in her fingers and her toes. And so she was convinced by her crewmates that this was exercise-induced asthma, which it wasn't, and that she would benefit from a bronchodilator, which she wasn't going to get. So what my wife did instead is she went on the internet and she bought something called Himalayan sea salt puffer. I don't know if you can't see this, but this is sort of like a blue and white canister. It has holes in the top, and in it is sea salt, presumably from the Himalayan mountains. So what she did is she the next morning, when this came in the mail, my daughter's sitting there at the table, reading the side of the box. This is going to be great, right? I mean, it's from rock formations in the Himalayas that are hundreds of millions of years old. This is going to work. And I looked at her and I said, honey, I mean, do you really think that the sodium chloride in this salt is any different than the sodium chloride in that salt shaker? And she looked at me and she said, would you let me believe in something, damn it? And she's right, because really, she's always right, actually, but it's, if I say nothing, what she does then is she probably breathes this salt air, which is relaxing to her. She thinks she's doing something. Now what happens before the race starts is she's not hyperventilating, which really was the problem. I think she would get nervous, she would hyperventilate. Now she's not hyperventilating. She's not getting the tingling in her feet and her hands. And this sea salt is given the credit for that, and that's okay. I mean, it doesn't really hurt. In that case, it would have helped, so I should have said nothing. She was right. I should have let her believe in stuff. So that's it. That's all I want to say. It gives plenty of time for your questions if you have them. But I think all I'm saying is that I think you have to be careful, that there are certainly times when alternative medicine, which lives under this sort of untouchable halo, I think people assume it's all natural, it's all good, there's sort of evil pharmaceutical companies on the one hand, but these products are made by elves and old hippies on flowering meadows. That's not true. This actually is the pharmaceutical industry. I mean, Pfizer has been in this business they bought Alisair, so they're probably the biggest manufacturers of megavitamins. Huffman LaRoche has been making these products since the 1930s. So this is big pharma. It's just an unregulated industry. I can't underline this enough. When you have an unregulated industry, you get to make sort of claims about efficacy and safety that you don't have to prove. You can put a dietary supplement on the market tomorrow, and that's a problem. So just buyer beware. Thank you. This, again, goes under my buyer. If by Chinese medicine, do you mean Chinese herbs? Is that principally what you're saying? Yeah, right. So, again, this is unregulated. It's certainly been true that Chinese herbs have been found to be contaminated with pharmaceutical grade products. So for example, things that promote potency will have sildenafil in them, like Viagra. I mean, the FDA last year took, in 2013, took 42 products off the market that were dietary supplements, including some of these Chinese herbs, because they were found to be contaminated with pharmaceuticals, because this is an unregulated industry. So I think you have to be really careful. Just since you mentioned China, I'll mention acupuncture because that's sort of commonly done. Acupuncture is the product of 2nd century BC China. This was a culture that not only didn't believe in dissection, but punished anybody who dissected a human body with death, which was a real disincentive to learning about human anatomy. So if you look at sort of the acupuncture points, they're always taken from outside. You never see anything under the skin. There were 12 meridians, which are these sort of longitudinal arcs from head to toe, into which one would insert acupuncture needles. Why 12? Because there are 12 great rivers in China. The Chinese believe that there were roughly 360 sort of different parts of the body because there's roughly 360 days of the year. So if you don't think that the human anatomy is based on days of the year or rivers in China, then they were making it up. Now that doesn't mean that acupuncture doesn't work. I think for some people it does work. What's interesting though is if you look, that it doesn't matter whether you insert needles according to these defined points from the 2nd century BC China or whether you insert them randomly. And then more recently there's been studies using these retractable needles where that also works just as well. So I think that there's something about that therapeutic interaction that is of value. And plus you can block the positive effect of acupuncture by giving intravenous naloxone, which is an endorphin blocker. So I think some people during acupuncture are learning to release their own endorphins, which is cool. So I think those who practice this medicine, this alternative medicine, when they have things that work, owe it to those who are benefiting, or frankly to the medical community in general, to figure out what is it about that therapeutic interaction that's valuable and to do it in the safest way possible. Because if you don't need to put the needles under the skin, don't put them under the skin. Because you can do things like introduce HIV, hepatitis A, hepatitis B, and sometimes the needles break off and lodge in places like hearts, livers, lungs. Not good. There was a woman named Victoria Beck whose child had autism and also had gastroenteric problems, intestinal problems, was taken to a University of Maryland hospital where there was, as part of the protocol for examining the intestine, Secretin was administered intravenously. And this mother felt that following that her child improved dramatically, that had started to develop language skills that the child hadn't had prior to that intervention, which that was the birth of it, which is fine. I mean, I think, from a parent standpoint, my child got something and then something good happened. Could that have been a clue? Fair enough. And it's the good news is this is a testable hypothesis. You're not asking how many angels can dance on the head of a pin here. You can answer this question in a scientific venue by giving children Secretin or giving them something that those who are caring for them or evaluating them think is Secretin. So, salt water. And, there are probably 15 studies that have been done at this point to show that there is no difference. But it's interesting that this was sort of held on to. There was one study that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine which showed no difference between the two, but both groups who were evaluating those patients felt that the patient had done better. And even the parents who even after this study was done, who were told it was no better than giving salt water, still wanted to drive hundreds of miles and spend thousands of dollars on Secretin because it became a belief system. And I think that's where medicine, which is a science-based system, sort of crosses the line into something more like religion. It's a belief system, and therefore it becomes unshakable. Yeah, you overrate me. I'm an infectious disease expert who works in vaccines, who just happened to write a book about alternative medicine. But what I would say is this is what I say to all this stuff. GABA, which is gamma-aminobutyric acid, I mean, these are all testable phenomena. So if the observation is made, and this is an interesting observation, you've observed the phenomenon, does this phenomenon then translate to other children? Is it something that one sees broadly where then one can cross the line and say, this is a reasonable recommended therapy? It's all testable. And I think that's my biggest complaint actually about alternative medicine is it's not tested because they don't need to test it. It's a $34 billion a year industry that's unregulated. That's okay. We're good. We get to make claims without having to prove them. I think all pharmaceutical companies would like that deal. I'm glad you asked that question. At our hospital, actually, we took an unusual step of basically saying that that anybody who brings dietary supplements into the hospital, because it's popular and many parents want to give these to their children, we now have them sign a form that says that, that because it's unregulated, we don't know that what's on the label necessarily reflects what's in the bottle. They may not meet good manufacturing practices, so we actually have them sign a waiver. But over time, what we've done is we've now sort of talked to all of these companies that where parents bring in stuff. I'm going to get to your question. And we've been able to identify certain dietary supplements where we feel we can get that meet a labeling standard, that meet a manufacturing standard, and where there are at least decent data for efficacy. Melatonin is one. Melatonin actually clearly does affect sleep cycle. We actually, because we can get a quality product, we actually prefer it to other products. I mean, to some of these products, what's the product I'm thinking of, begins with Ambien, thank you, Ambien, which, where that's much more problematic, actually. I mean, Ambien is used in the adult hospital next door, and, patients are ripping out their IVs, walking down the hall, and waking up the next morning not remembering any of it and thinking it's the best sleep they ever had. So melatonin actually is a value, we think. You happen to pick one we actually have on our formulary. I mean, obviously we have vitamins on our formulary. We have certain minerals on our formulary for children that are in our metabolic division that need it. But I think we've largely taken it off the formulary because we are scared. Probably the best example is St. John's wort. St. John's wort is metabolized through the liver, and it can interfere with drugs that are also metabolized through the liver. So we've had children has had other hospitals. We're a hospital that does bone marrow transplants and solid organ transplants. We've had kids who were unknowingly getting St. John's wort, which interfered with their immunosuppressive agents, which caused them then to reject their transplants. We didn't know they were getting it. It's because people assume it's all benign. It can only help, it can never hurt. These are drugs, so they should be regulated like drugs. Thank you.